introduction, Matthias, and thank you guys for the opportunity to talk to you and share with you something that I'm passionate about and enjoy. I am obsessed with human performance and human potential, and neurotransmitters are something that play a crucial role in our ability to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can optimize your neurotransmitters. When you guys read this, does that surprise you? 95% of the decisions you make are not based in logic or rational thought. They're based on your feelings. This is research from a neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, and he found that people who have brain injuries to the parts of the brain that control feelings are no longer able to make the simplest decisions. We would think that if you didn't have feelings that you could become a robot and do things on autopilot, but it was exactly the opposite. They became almost paralyzed and could not make a single decision, no matter how simple that decision seemed. So, the question is for you guys, how are you feeling right now?
Excellent.
Excellent? All right. So, as Matthias said, I love things that are easy to implement. I want you guys to be able to feel things and experience things. That's how my brain works. So we're going to play some Simon Says, and we're going to change your physiology. Okay? Your physiology will dictate neurotransmitter states. So as we go through the rest of this PowerPoint and presentation, we'll talk about some ways that you guys can change and alter your feelings in any given moment so that you can get the performance or the output that you want. But we're going to show you a few of those things right now. So raise your hand if you're familiar with Simon Says. Okay. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to tell you a command. If it is not preceded by Simon Says, you do not do it. Okay? Simple enough, right? All right, so when I hit play, this is actually a video. It's a 2-minute video. So we're going to play for 2 minutes. And my goal is to get every single one of you out at least once. All right? You ready? All right. Do we have like somebody that can control volume? Because I don't know how loud that's going to be. Okay. I don't want the music to be louder than me. All right. You guys ready? All right. So 2 minutes. If you get out, keep playing. Don't stop. Okay. Ready? Go a little bit louder. Okay. All right. Simon Says, stand up. All right. So Simon says, one step this way. Right. Simon says, one step back here. Great. So you should be back at your seat. Go ahead and sit down in your chair. All right. Stand back up. Simon says, stand up. All right. Simon says, sit down. Simon says, stand up. Simon says 5 squats. Just squat down to your chair, touch your butt, come right back up 5 times. All right, when you get your 5, Simon says hands over your head. All right, clap 3 times. All right, arms down. Simon says arms down. Simon says sit down. Stand back up. Simon says stand up. All right. Simon says spin 360 back to where you started. All right. Now do it the other way. You guys are getting good. Simon says do it the other way. All right. Simon says sit down. All right. Simon says stand up. All right. Simon says clap 3 times. Sit back down. All right. Simon says sit down. Simon says stand up, and then we'll do 5 squats. Simon says 5 squats. All right, Simon says hands up, go 3 claps. All right, good. You guys can sit back down. Simon says sit down. Simon says stand back up. All right. Simon says spin. All right, you're good. We're done. You can sit down. Is that fun? You guys smiling?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So I'm going to take you step by step everything that we just did and why that changed your state. You're in a different state now than you were 2 minutes ago. Okay? And we'll go step by step through some of the things that we did. Why Simon Says? Because I like it and it's fun. But it does change your physiology, which is going to positively impact your mood. You guys are smiling, you laughed, you got some movement in. That music was specifically chosen. That's not just a song that I like and thought would be good. If you know the song, it's called I'm Happy. You were hearing I'm Happy over and over again, right? So it has a positive tempo, it has a positive message. So that's NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and then there's pattern recognition. So we'll go through these. Again, music impacts our mood. We know this. You can listen to music and instantly change your mood. Movement changes our mood, alters our physiology, changes our neurotransmitter profile, NLP, and then smiling. So music activates the specific brain regions linked to emotion, memory, and it can boost neuroplasticity. It also releases oxytocin. Singing also releases oxytocin, and that's the cuddle hormone. So everything here you guys can use as a single hack, or you can stack them for a synergistic effect, which is what we just did, right? So the idea of combining multiple hacks, using red light in the morning and doing cold showers and intermittent fasting. Those are 3 different things that you can implement into a morning routine. So again, any of these can be used in isolation or together. So with music, you want to match that to what you're trying to accomplish. What I like on any given day is going to be different. What you like versus what I like, what works for you, what works for me is different. If you have to be creative, if you need to be focused. So there's no right or wrong way. If it works for you, it's great. Okay. Movement. We know that being physically active and moving changes our hormones, changes our physiology, and it can change our thoughts and our emotions. 2 great quotes from science. Recent research: exercise generally comparable to an antidepressant for patients that have major depressive disorder. So you want to talk about elevating your mood. Exercise works as well as most antidepressants. And it usually takes effect within 5 minutes of moderate exercise. So it doesn't have to be a 20-minute run. It doesn't have to be an hour-long workout in the morning. Get up, walk outside for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We always say, or I say, get out in nature. Over here, you guys say the nature, which I like. So get out in the nature. NLP, I mentioned that, neuro-linguistic programming. It's the stuff that's behind subliminal messaging. If you repeat phrases over and over, like I'm happy, or another one that I love is to just stand up. There's something called a power pose. If you guys are familiar with Amy Cuddy's research, and she did a TED Talk, holding a power pose for 2 minutes can increase testosterone by 20%, also reduces cortisol. That will change your physiology. It will change your mood. If you stand up, look in a mirror, and hold this pose for 2 minutes and continually repeat, I am freaking awesome, and you can phrase that differently if you want, it will change your state. I promise you it will. And that will change your performance on any given day, right? Smiling releases feel-good neurotransmitters. You get dopamine, you get endorphins, serotonin. It relaxes your body, lowers your heart rate and your blood pressure, and can act as a natural pain reliever. The endorphins do. Okay, so that's why we did what we just did. So you guys experienced all those things. So it's not just me telling you you can do this stuff, right? The final thing is, as you guys started to catch on to what I was doing, that's pattern recognition. There are neurotransmitters involved with this, and it is something that the human brain does exceptionally well. If you guys are following artificial intelligence at all, we won't go down that rabbit hole. We don't have time, but machine learning, pattern recognition, it is something that is very exciting right now. But recent article in Frontiers of Neuroscience says that superior pattern processing is the essence of the evolved human brain. So this SPP, superior pattern processing, the fundamental basis of most, if not all, unique features of our brain, including intelligence, language, information, invention, belief in imaginary entities such as ghosts and gods. So it's really cool stuff if you guys want to go further down that rabbit hole. But hopefully you got to experience a little bit of yourself doing that as you started to try to figure out which way I was going with some of those commands. So we'll get on with this. We're going to talk about how humans have evolved, how nootropics and cognitive enhancement have been a part of that, and we'll wrap it up by kind of talking about each neurotransmitter specifically and give you some things that you can do for each of them. So the original biohack, survival, right? If our ancestors had not been able to successfully do that, we wouldn't be here. If survival was the original biohack, nature was the first guru. Everything we learned came from nature. We lived in a completely different time and place. We paid attention to our surroundings. We took everything we needed to know from nature, which is kind of a lost art in today's world. Our species, we know from anthropologists and paleo-type nutritionists that our brains began to evolve when we figured out that we could break ribs from carcasses that were laying around and start eating bone marrow, which led to the evolution of our brain. And we started hunting. We began to be able to outsmart animals, DHA from fish. All of that led to a bigger brain, and that obviously gave us a survival advantage. If you guys are familiar with the book Sapiens, if you haven't read it, it's a great book, but it talks about how Homo sapiens, is how we got here as opposed to any of the other branches of that family tree. But there was a survival advantage to being smarter than the cave dweller next to you, okay? And we have evidence of this throughout history, throughout written history, and even before that with oral history, things being passed down. So there are mention of nootropics in the Iliad. If you guys are familiar with Odysseus and how he was able to outsmart Kirke, and the story goes that he met Hermes, who gave him a potion that would allow him to be immune to her tonics. There is debate on the internet about what those were, whether that was Jimson weed or galantamine. But the point is, as far back as Greece and probably before written history, we were looking at nature, picking herbs and botanicals and altering our states. If you guys have read the latest from Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler, Stealing Fire, they talk about Kaikion. And this was this tradition that the powers that be used to see the world in a different way, and it was so sought after that certain philosophers risked being outcast from society for stealing it, and that's where the name Stealing Fire came from. So herbs, bacopa, tons of different minerals or botanicals, herbs, mushrooms. We know lion's mane, chaga, reishi, turkey tail. These have been used in Chinese, Ayurvedic, Russian tonics. They're called the immortality tonics, elixirs of longevity. This one's really cool. This is an artichoke dish, and it's called za'atar. It is a Syrian dish. This is the original paleo nootropic. This goes back, if you just Google za'atar, you can get the recipe for this, or email me and I'll send you the link to this article. But artichoke have been used not only in Syrian dishes like this, but in Ukrainian and Russian stews that were given to students the night before and the morning of tests to increase their performance on tests. So people have known about these things and been building them into dishes for centuries. That's my cheat sheet in case I forgot any of those. I'm jet lagged a little bit, so I built in a safety net. What's really cool about this is that all that ancient wisdom is being supported by modern science now. We've got this, this whole biohacker movement and this interest in nootropics. So, we're seeing research go into a lot of that stuff, and when it supports what we've known for years, it's really cool. Lion's mane mushroom, there are studies that show 500x increase in nerve growth factor, which results in a 60% increase in nerve cell proliferation. So that's fascinating. If we can, it was once thought that after a certain age we didn't grow new nerve cells, that we can take a mushroom and grow new nerve cells, right? Artichoke, which was in 3 of those dishes, the Ukrainian culture, Russian culture, Syrian culture. It turns out, and we know this because this is part of our CILTEP formula, that artichoke is rich in luteolin. That is the bioactive compound. It is a PDE4 inhibitor. That is an enzyme that breaks down cyclic AMP. So we get an increase in cyclic AMP, which potentiates long-term memory. And that is why memory grandmasters like to use CILTEP to memorize decks of cards faster.
Yeah.
Right? Acetylcholine, which arguably played a role in Odysseus's adventures, is responsible for mental processing speed, supports signaling capacity of our central nervous system. It's used for increased motor unit recruitment. A lot of really cool stuff with acetylcholine. Bacopa, an adaptogenic herb that supports acetylcholine, serotonin, and GABA, 3 of the 4 main neurotransmitters. That's another one that we know societies and cultures have been using for thousands of years. It also may support memory. So we'll come back to all those neurotransmitters in a few minutes, the specific ones. But for now, you have chemicals in your brain, right? Hopefully not this kind of chemical. Do you guys all remember Mr. Yuck? No? All right. When I was a kid in elementary school, this was a big green sticker that they told your parents to put on all the stuff that was under the kitchen counter so you would know not to drink it. So yeah, we have chemicals in our head. They're chemical messengers, and they support communication across the synaptic clefts, also called junctions, between our neurons, our nerve cells. That is the role of a neurotransmitter. So when we talk about these things and how they can influence your thoughts, your decisions, it's because they are literally the communication for your nervous system. We have over 100 billion neurons in our head. These neurons and neurotransmitters literally govern our thoughts, cognition, mood, movement, just about everything we do as humans. So we'll talk about the 4 that we focus on at Natural Stacks. There are other neurotransmitters, but these are the 4 main ones that we will focus on. So dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and acetylcholine. We'll go through each of these individually, but if you're looking for a one-liner about each of them, basically dopamine is the gas pedal. It's motivation, mental drive, the initiative to get started. Serotonin is responsible for mood, anxiety, fear. GABA is calm and relaxation. It's the inhibitory neurotransmitter. And then acetylcholine is mental processing speed. So dopamine is another area where research is kind of changing the way we've thought about it. So I mentioned 100 billion neurons in our head. Fewer than 1% of those neural cells are able to generate dopamine. So that's a very small percentage. And it's an interesting line of research in that for something that is so powerful and has such a commanding effect that only a few of our cells are able to produce it. For years, it was thought to be a pleasure-reward pathway, specifically the reward for an action that was positive or one that we wanted to do again. And that's why it's also been called the replay button. If you guys listen to the podcast, maybe you've heard the one with Dr. Michael Merzenich, who is the founder of Brain HQ, and he actually called it the replay button. Are we short on time?
No.
Okay. So what's interesting is that the new research is showing that people with a lack of dopamine have no urge to move, to eat, to do other things. Even things that are survival in nature, like eating. So that's showing us that dopamine is more involved in the front of that pleasure reward pathway, as opposed to being on the back end and being more of a replay button. It's actually more involved with motivation, initiative, drive, and the perseverance to see that thing through. So here's 3 of those new research articles. I pulled quotes to kind of give you an idea of where people are going with this research. So Neuroscience Journal, Neuron, published this one in 2013. Researchers have shown that it regulates motivation, causing individuals to initiate and persevere to obtain something. So you see that shift as opposed to being, hey, that was good, do that again, to being the thing that helps us get up and initiate that. So dopamine researcher John Salamone, also a psychology professor at UConn, low levels of dopamine make people and other animals less likely to work for things. So it has more to do with motivation and cost-benefit analysis than the pleasure itself. 2005 review, so that's more than one study, that its role in pleasure reward, the role of dopamine in the reward process was classically associated with the ability to experience pleasure. Recent data suggests a more motivational role. All right, so dopamine is more on the front end. It's responsible for motivation and drive. Serotonin, like I said earlier, it's responsible for regulating mood, anxiety, and fear. What most people didn't know until a few years ago, if you guys are paying attention to the latest research in science, you probably are aware of this second bullet point. Depending on what research you look at, 90 to 95% of that neurotransmitter are produced in our gut, not in our brain. So this puts a lot of importance on some of the other things that you're hearing at the Biohacker Summit and that you're hearing in the biohacking space, that what we eat is of the utmost importance, that taking care of gut health, getting that microbiome where we want it, has huge implications on how we think, how we feel, what we fear, or how much fear we have and how we deal with that. So really fascinating here. Recently talked to a few gut health experts, and the overwhelming theory that they're working with now in treating people in functional medicine realms is that gut dysbiosis, meaning that your biome is not where we want it to be, contributes obviously to leaky gut, irritable bowel syndrome, but that is linked to depression, carbohydrate cravings, brain fog, and the number one cause of that is actually exposure to foods that disrupt our gut health, whether that be a food intolerance, a food allergy, or it could be chemicals, preservatives, anything that's in your food that has a negative impact on your gut health. So what you don't eat may be as important as what you do eat to foster gut health. And obviously with gut health comes brain health, now that we know that connection is so strong. So serotonin and dopamine were the first 2 that we talked about. Again, think of dopamine as sort of the gas pedal and serotonin as positive mood. And I found this online and just had to put it in there because I'm a nerd and I think this is funny, but technically dopamine and serotonin are the only 2 things that you enjoy. Anything that brings you pleasure is activating one of those 2 things or both. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that is it's a combination of choline and acetic acid. It is a neuromodulator, so it's responsible for arousal, like I said earlier, mental processing speed, which of course has implications in attention, memory, motivation. And the attention thing I think is very interesting because if you're somebody who has a lot of choline to begin with, then taking more choline can actually push you further away from being focused. And we'll talk about that more at the end. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but kind of keep that in mind. It's also responsible for lateral thinking, being able to connect ideas. Certain times you want to be creative, you want to think outside the box, you want to think about different ways to solve a problem. And then other times you need to be focused. You need to enter data on a spreadsheet or write or whatever. So, and then like we said earlier, neuromuscular junctions. Acetylcholine does have a large role in movement and the amount of motor units that are recruited. This is one reason that alpha GPC which is a form of acetylcholine, has been used as a pre-workout, because by facilitating the ability to recruit more motor units, you can get more muscle fibers to fire, which results in greater strength output, greater CNS activation, which is, if you guys know I probably should have told you my bio in the beginning, but I do have a background as a strength coach and gym owner, so I like being able to pick up heavy things. So if I can, manipulate my neurotransmitters to be able to lift a little bit heavier, then that's a fun thing. GABA, the inhibitory neurotransmitter. So I'm not sure how many newspapers are in this picture, but it might be safe to call that 174. If those are single newspapers, they're certainly not 85 pages, but I wanted you guys to have a visual for this. We are in a world of information overload. We take in so much more information than we ever have. And this is, this bullet point here is actually from 2007. We're in 2017. So if you guys can think back to 2007, I don't think Instagram was around. Facebook was not what it is. There were no stories, there were no lives. Social media was not even a fraction of what it is today. So in 2007, we took in 174 newspapers per day that were 85 pages in length. That's how much information we took in 2007. So it has to be an order of magnitude higher now. We also produced 6 of those newspapers every single day. And compare that with 1986, where we produced 2.5 pages of information a day. So when these researchers are talking about how much we produce, it's via text, via email, Twitter, whatever. And again, this is 2007, so think about what it really is in 2017. And the point of all this is that it's leading to something called excitotoxicity, and that is the pathological process by which our neurons are damaged and killed by overactivation of receptors for the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate. So glutamate and GABA work in inverse. Glutamate is the excitatory, GABA is the inhibitory. So it's not just that we're on information overload, it's what it's doing to all of our neurotransmitters and our behaviors as a species and our society. It's one of the reasons that alcohol consumption is a favorite pastime of a lot of people who are stressed out and need to take the edge off, right? GABA, alcohol is actually a GABA agonist, which means that it binds to a GABA receptor and your body doesn't know the difference. So you get the same effect as if the GABA molecule was binding to that receptor. So people who may have, you've had a hard day, or you've been at a conference like this and you've taken in a whole lot of information, and you need to take the edge off, unwind, relax. I'm not saying don't drink alcohol, I know that's a part of society, but know why you're doing it if you're going to do it. And if you're doing it to meet this need of taking the edge off, maybe think twice. But it is certainly one of the reasons that we are so drawn to alcohol. So just keep all that in mind as you start to, because I'm sure you guys are like me, you want to consume information, you want to learn, you want to get better, you're trying to expose yourself to as much of that technology and information as you can, but we do need to be aware of what that's actually doing to our neurotransmitters. So sometimes cognitive enhancement and nootropics are not about thinking faster and doing more. It's about protecting your brain for the long run and finding that balance point. So how do we optimize our neurotransmitters? I always want to preface what I say here with what I call states versus traits. Like Matthias said in the intro, my personal philosophy and that of Natural Stacks is not one where it's take this pill and everything is solved. Pill is never the solution. We look at what we do as a tool to help you optimize. But before you can do that, the foundation has to be in place. So the way I talk about that is states and traits. A state is a short-term, transient way of being. The way you are right now is a state. That's what we altered. That's what we changed by playing Simon Says. That didn't change your traits. It didn't change who you are. So talk a little bit about training and changing states. Somebody said this to me recently. I told them I was going to steal it, and I really don't even remember who said it. So I'm sorry. But they said you can take all the protein and creatine in the world that you want, but until you actually go in the gym and lift the weights, you're not going to get any adaptation. And that applies for any trait or quality that we're trying to change about ourselves. We have to do the work. And again, I like to emphasize this because I don't want people to think it's take this pill, all your problems are solved. What those traits are that we need to change and modify for each of us is different. And I can't tell you that without knowing more about where you are. Here's a list of a few that I came up with off the top of my head that can help us find more of that balance point. Again, these are sort of tailored to people who are type A biohackers that are kind of conditioned to more, better, faster, stronger. So this is kind of working us back to that balance point. More beta brainwaves, less alpha brainwaves. So meditation, yoga, breath work, being in nature, gratitude journaling, flow tanks, working on time management. That's a very often overlooked area of our lives. And it's one that I would really, really strongly urge everyone to pay attention to. Not to keep your email window open while you're working, because that will take your focus away from the task that you're supposed to be working on. There's so many other things we can say about time management, sleep, movement. Again, movement doesn't have to be a stressor. It can be recovery. It can be going for a walk. It can be going for a hike. It can be yoga. I think so many of us get in that habit of making movement something that actually compounds and adds to our stress. So diet light and information diets. I used to be much better about this than I am now. My wife's in the back, she'll agree. But when I ran my gym, I would turn my phone on airplane mode at 8 o'clock at night, and it would not come back on until 6 or 7 the next morning. I had to set those boundaries. I'm not as good about that anymore as I used to be. But that's something that we can all, whether it's overnight or for the weekend, no technology, whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong way, but the idea is to move yourself back towards balance or productivity. So now when we talk about optimizing states, again, these are our short-term, transient, your day or your morning, your afternoon, your hour. Always start with a baseline. And this is what I started to allude to earlier, where certain nootropics can increase alpha brainwaves. Certain nootropics can decrease alpha brainwaves. So how do you know which one is right for you? People ask me, because of the nature of what I do all the time, is Siltep or Alpha Brain or Qualia, which one's better? Obviously, I'm biased. I'm going to tell you Siltep, but that's like asking somebody with a toolbox which tool is the best. Sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need a hammer, right? It's what's the application and what do you need? So when we start with a baseline, you're able to find out what you need. This is a picture of me at Peak Brain Institute in LA. This is a wet EEG. They make dry ones, but this one was wet. She's not stabbing me. That is a syringe that sticks gel underneath of those electrodes so that you get a connection and can read your brain waves. So we actually measured my brain waves in a control setting, and then 48 hours later, we did it with Siltep. And in the control setting, my personal brainwave profile is one where my alpha brainwaves are 2 to 3 standard deviations higher than the norm. when that happens, when alpha brainwaves are skewed too high compared to beta, that is associated with being ADD. If that skewed ratio is too high alpha to theta, then it's ADHD with impulsivity instead of inattention. So if you guys were at the Biohacker Summit in Finland in the fall, that's what I talked about. So my whole talk was about this stuff. So I'm not going to bore you with those details again. But if you want to dig into that more, reach out to me or ask me later and we'll talk about it. But the point is, CILTEP actually moved that ratio into a favorable state for me. When we did the retest with CILTEP, it lowered my alpha brainwaves. So for me, taking a nootropic that is cholinergic, boosting choline or increasing alpha brainwaves, will actually move me further from the balance point that I want to be for being focused. But I would never have known that objectively without taking baseline readings and tests. So it's important that we quantify this stuff. Now, subjectively, I felt that. Subjectively, I could take these things and notice that one made me more focused, the other one made me more spacey. Not everybody has access to a QEEG. The simple, shorter, faster way is a neurotransmitter test. It's called the Braverman test. If you're familiar with The Edge Effect, that's a book written by Dr. Eric Braverman. You can Google Braverman test. It's a free PDF. In 10 or 15 minutes, you can figure out your neurotransmitter profile, whether you're dopamine dominant, serotonin dominant, GABA, or choline dominant. There's a second part to the test, which will actually tell you if you have a deficiency, in any of those. So that deficiency would be more of a trait, more of a short-term thing. But your nature, your state is going to be, how you are as a person. And obviously, because that one is printed out, take it, you get results cheaper and faster. You can also take urine neurotransmitter tests. That's another objective way of doing it, but it usually costs around $200 or $300. Sometimes that's cost prohibitive for people. Sometimes it's not. I would imagine if you're here, it's probably not. Anything that's objective will probably give you a better reading than something that is subjective, like the Braverman test. And again, it's important that you find your baseline and you start to experiment because it's different for everybody. And this, the way that this saying was actually taught to me was it's the Indian, not the arrow. I think that as an American, I think we have to be a little bit more politically correct to the Native Americans. So it can also be phrased as it's the martial artist, not the martial art. There have been a lot of people that have done martial arts. There's one Bruce Lee, right? So think about things this way. Experiment for yourself, figure out what works for you. If you learn sort of the template, learn the rules, learn the science, and then you can learn how to manipulate it to bend it to your will to get the outcome that you want. And isn't that what biohacking really is, right? So a couple of ways that you can optimize your neurotransmitters, the four that we've been talking about. Dopamine, you can start your day with small, enjoyable tasks that will allow you to build momentum. And this is a really important thing. So a lot of people more in that like motivational world will talk about getting the first victory of the day. However you want to phrase that. You can also watch motivational media, whether it's following Instagram accounts that post motivational messages. You can load up YouTube playlists with videos. My high school basketball coach used to tell us, fake it till you make it. And I hated hearing that as a 16 or 17-year-old. I never really understood it, but I do now. So fake it till you make it. You wake up, you tell yourself you've got this. If you have to stand in the mirror, hold a power pose, say I'm freaking awesome, whatever it might be. These are things that can kind of jumpstart and create that momentum and get your day going. Maybe it's a cold shower. If you take a cold shower, it will not only change your physiology, but it will change your psychology. There's something empowering about knowing that you voluntarily did something uncomfortable, something that most people wouldn't do. So serotonin, again, 95% of it is produced in the gut. There's really no hack to that other than fixing your diet, heal your gut, getting good sleep, avoiding high sugar foods, high carbohydrate diets usually perpetuate that negative serotonin cycle because you get, when you eat a large carbohydrate meal, you get a boost in serotonin. So you sort of become dependent on carbs for the serotonin hit, the same way you can become dependent on alcohol for the GABA hit. Acetylcholine, determine your own levels. If you need more, you can use things like lecithin or egg yolks in your diet. Sunflower lecithin over soy lecithin. I don't think I have to tell you guys why sunflower is better than soy. GABA, just chill out. Limit sensory input. Float tanks are great. The information diet. Include more parasympathetic activities in your life. And most of that list on the previous slide, those were parasympathetic activities. It's important, if you guys are familiar with sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest or feed and breed. Our body will not devote resources to recovery and improvement and optimization if it thinks it's being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So if you're always in fight or flight, you're not going to get the recovery and the optimization that you're looking for. So we'll talk about our products, our nootropics. Our flagship product is Siltep, designed to increase focus and memory. Like I said, it includes artichoke extract and forskolin, which inhibit PDE4, that acts to increase cyclic AMP in our brain, which potentiates long-term memory. So the subjective feeling is one of increased novelty, increased desire to be engaged in whatever it is that you're doing. And then because you're more engaged, you go deeper down that rabbit hole, you read more of it, you learn, or you pursue it further, or you're paying closer attention. And then because long-term memory is potentiated, you're more efficient at cataloging and storing and then later recalling that information. We do have a line of brain foods that focuses on each of those neurotransmitters. So GABA brain food, dopamine brain food, serotonin brain food. You notice that acetylcholine brain food is not up there yet. We are working on that one. It will be out later this year. All of our brain foods, obviously we're not providing that specific neurotransmitter. We're providing the vitamins, minerals, and amino acids that serve as the precursors and cofactors for the biosynthesis of that neurotransmitter. So we're giving your body what it needs to create those naturally on its own. And then the Myco Stacks is probably, it's our newest. We launched it in November. It is a line of 3 different mushroom products. I think it's one of my favorite things that we've done, and I've talked to a lot of people already today and 2 nights ago at the Paleo Institute, people who are really loving this. And Myco Immune is turkey, tail, reishi, and chaga. So that one promotes immunity, longevity. You might recall those from the earlier slides in Chinese, Ayurvedic, and Russian tonics for immortality or longevity. Brain health is Myco Mind. That is lion's mane mushroom. We talked about that earlier. Boosts nerve growth factor, and it's combined with BioPQQ for mitochondrial health in our Myco Mind. And then Myco Boost is yerba mate and cordyceps, which improves ATP production and efficiency. So you get a little bit of full body and brain vitality and exercise endurance. And again, I'll reiterate, everybody's different. All of our brain chemistries are different. So you've got to find the right tool for your toolbox, know when and how to use each tool to match the day that you have ahead of you and what your desired goal is. Again, if you have to enter data on a spreadsheet all day today, and then tomorrow is mastermind whiteboard day, you may have 2 different approaches to the way you enhance cognition, right? And finally, go talk to Succeeder. They're upstairs. They are our Swedish distributor for Natural Stacks products. So if you guys want to take home any products this weekend, Matthias and his colleagues up there have it all. So That's what the bottles look like if you're not familiar with them. All right, we got 5 minutes. Questions? Yeah.
I started taking probiotics. I used to take it all the time when I was sick from antibiotics and things. And then I stopped getting sick. And then I started taking them about a year ago. I don't know much about them. It's under recommendation, but they sell them really inexpensively and then super expensively, depending on how many billions and billions of organisms. It's the Carl Sagan bottle of it's an inside message. But I spend the money on the gigantic one, and then I refrigerate it and treat it like they're, babies. Am I wasting my time?
Unfortunately, my short answer is yes. You wouldn't be if every step of that process they were treated like babies the way you did. But nobody can guarantee that from the time of manufacture to the time that you ingest them, that the warehouse, that the transportation companies, that the reseller kept them at that refrigerated temperature. Most, and you mentioned like the CFUs, the colony forming units, that number that's advertised. If a company is really, really ethical, what they will do is they will put that number on there and then they will say at the time of bottling. And if they're not ethical, then they just put that number on there. But everybody who manufactures them knows that number will dwindle from time of manufacture to the time of ingestion. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is that they're dead, that there's nothing in there. I always recommend that people get their probiotics through the foods that we eat. I'm a huge proponent of eating fermented foods daily, whether that's sauerkraut or kimchi. Chocolate is actually a fermented food, so another reason to eat 100% dark chocolate. So I think my answer to you would be continue to get as many probiotics as you can, get them from as many different food sources as possible, but make sure they're from food sources.
And when I say prebiotic?
Prebiotic is food for probiotic. So prebiotic is a resistant starch. That is a carbohydrate that is not digested in our stomach. It goes straight to the colon where it is fermented by the probiotics, the good bacteria. The byproduct of that is butyric acid. If you're familiar with the fatty acid profile of butter, it's the same short chain fatty acid that's in butter, and it goes down that GABA pathway. So prebiotics can be used to promote sleep, promote GABA relaxation, but they also feed and facilitate the microbiome that we want. So I think both of those are parts of a diet that we should all be following. Yeah.
Chocolate and butter.
Chocolate and butter.
We have time for one last question. Yes.
Yeah.
How quick can you change between these different products depending on your task for the day? And similar question, how quick can you go on CILTEP and off CILTEP?
You could take dopamine and serotonin on the same day. A lot of people will take dopamine in the morning for motivation, and then serotonin brain food in the evening to kind of help wind down, or even GABA brain food to help wind down. CILTEP, the effects usually last 8 to 14 hours, so it's typically we always recommend take it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, and you will feel the effects most of the day. If you've not taken CILTEP before, we always tell people take it 3 or 4 days in a row, and then stop taking it, and then you'll probably notice on the 3 or 4 days that you've stopped taking it, that you see a drop off or a decline. Because if you're not familiar with CILTEP, it's not one of those products that you take it and you feel something. It's not like drinking a cup of coffee. It's non-stimulant. It sort of works in the background, but what you will notice is a couple hours go by and you're just super engaged in whatever it is that you're doing.
Thank you.
So Ryan is not only a very friendly guy, because he for sure is. So he's such a ton of knowledge. So take the time. We have this man in the house for the full day. So come up to him. He'd love to speak with any questions you have about all these kinds of things and more. And he's also good looking, isn't he? Because he used to be a real model. So that's quite an addition as well. So thank you so much, Ryan, for this.